The city was still waking when Ethan Walker stepped off the bus, carrying everything he owned in a worn leather bag. The early light spilled across cracked sidewalks and closed cafes, and for a moment, he felt like he had arrived nowhere at all. It wasn't escape he was looking for, just a pause, a small space where life could feel quiet again. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had ended a long relationship that had drained more of him than he cared to admit. His job as a freelance writer wasn't steady enough to keep his apartment, and the silence that followed each argument still echoed in his mind. He needed a fresh start, even if that meant sleeping on a stranger's couch. That he scrolled through listings on his cracked phone until one caught his attention: room for rent, quiet neighborhood, flexible terms. Must be tidy and respectful. The ad was signed by Daniel Hayes. Their first conversation was short. Daniel's voice over the phone was warm but precise. He asked questions about Ethan's habits, his work schedule, and whether he could move in immediately. When Ethan said yes, Daniel simply replied, "Then you're welcome to come by this evening. I'll have coffee ready." The house stood on a quiet street lined with tall, whispering trees. It wasn't grand, but it had the kind of comfort that made Ethan pause. A small porch light glowed like a steady promise. When Daniel opened the door, his smile was easy, genuine. He looked a few years older, early 30s, confident but approachable, the kind of man who made people feel instantly at ease. "Ethan, right?" Daniel extended his hand. "Come in. You must be exhausted." The scent of roasted coffee filled the air, mingling with something softer, lavender, maybe. The living room was neat but lived in, with stacks of books, half-burned candles, and a piano tucked against one wall. It felt more like a sanctuary than a house. They sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as rain began to whisper against the windows. Conversation came easily. Daniel spoke about his work as an architect, how he mostly worked from home, and how he preferred company to silence. Ethan found himself smiling, almost forgetting how unfamiliar the world around him was. "The spare room's small," Daniel said, leading him down the hall, "but it's yours. No rules, just respect the quiet." Ethan nodded, running his hand across the wooden desk by the window. "It's perfect," he said. And for the first time in months, he meant it. Days passed gently. Ethan wrote at the desk, and Daniel worked at his computer in the adjoining room. In the evenings, they shared simple dinners, pasta, soup, takeout when neither of them felt like cooking. Sometimes they'd watch old movies, their laughter breaking the stillness that had once filled the house. Ethan began to notice things about Daniel: how he hummed when he cooked, how he lingered at the window before bed, how his eyes carried both warmth and weariness. There was a quiet gravity to him, as if he'd lived through something he never spoke of. Then came the night of the storm. The rain began just after sunset, turning the air electric. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the lights flickered before fading completely. Ethan stood in the hallway, holding a candle. Daniel appeared from the dark, flashlight in hand. "Power's out," he said, his voice calm. "Happens every few weeks. Nothing to worry about." They sat in the living room, the glow of the candle softening the edges of their faces. Daniel poured whiskey into 2 glasses. "To surviving another blackout," he said with a grin. Hours passed as they talked, about writing, architecture, the ache of starting over. Daniel listened closely, the kind of listener who didn't just hear words but understood what was left unsaid. When the thunder grew louder, Ethan shivered. Daniel noticed. "It's colder than usual tonight," he said quietly. "You can stay in my room if you want, it's warmer there. Just until the lights come back." Ethan hesitated. "I'll be fine," he said, though his voice betrayed him. Daniel didn't press, only smiled and said, "The offer stands." Later, as Ethan lay awake in the spare room, listening to the rain beat against the windows, he couldn't shake the thought of Daniel's calm voice or the warmth behind his eyes. Something about that night felt like a beginning, one he hadn't planned, one he wasn't sure he was ready for, and as lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the house for a brief second, Ethan realized that, somehow, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. Morning came quietly, like it was afraid to disturb the silence left behind. "The smell of burnt coffee filled the kitchen when I walked in. Ryan stood by the counter, his back turned, shoulders tense beneath his gray hoodie. He didn't look up when I said his name. The air between us felt sharp, heavy with everything unspoken from the night before. "You and Liam," he said finally, his voice low but edged. "What was that?" I froze. There was no good answer, only truths that would hurt either way. "It wasn't what you think," I said carefully. "We were just talking." Ryan turned then, his eyes full of disbelief. "Talking? Ethan, I saw you. The way you looked at him, you think I wouldn't notice?" His words cut like glass. "He's my friend. My best friend." I wanted to defend myself, but all I could say was, "I didn't mean for anything to happen." That made him laugh bitterly. "You never do." He grabbed his keys from the counter and left before I could speak again, the door slamming so hard it shook the walls. Outside, the sound of the engine faded into the forest. I sank into a chair, staring at the half-empty coffee pot. Guilt gnawed at me, but underneath it, a strange calm lingered, a quiet awareness that, for once, I hadn't lied to myself. A few minutes later, Liam walked in, his hair still damp from the morning air. "He's gone, isn't he?" he asked softly. I nodded. "He thinks I couldn't even finish the sentence. Liam's face tightened with regret. "I never wanted this to happen. Not like this." I looked up at him, searching his eyes for something certain, something solid. "Then what did you want?" He hesitated, then said, "To be honest. For once in my life." His voice trembled, stripped of its usual calm. "When I'm around you, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. That's all I meant last night." I believed him. But believing didn't make it easier. "Ryan's never going to understand that," I whispered. "I know," Liam said. "And maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe this trip wasn't about him at all." There was nothing left to say. By noon, Noah packed his things without asking questions. Emily stayed silent, avoiding eye contact with Ryan when he returned later that day. The group that had arrived together only days ago now felt like strangers trapped in the same story, waiting for it to end. The ride home was silent. The road stretched endlessly, each mile pushing us farther from the mountains, from the version of ourselves that had existed there. Ryan drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his jaw set. I sat in the back beside Liam, though neither of us said a word. The tension was unbearable, an invisible wall between every seat. When we finally reached the city, Ryan didn't wait for goodbyes. He dropped me off at my apartment, barely glancing my way. "Take care of yourself," he said flatly, before driving off. That night, I sat by the window, watching headlights fade along the street. I wanted to call him, to explain, to make him see that it wasn't betrayal, it was truth trying to surface after years of hiding. But some truths can't be softened. They have to hurt before they heal. Days turned into weeks. Ryan didn't answer my messages, and I didn't blame him. Then, one evening, I got a text from Liam. It was short, almost hesitant. "I'm moving. Needed a fresh start. I hope you find peace, Ethan. You deserve it." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet thank you, to him, to myself, to the silence that had followed me home. Months later, Ryan showed up at my door. He looked tired, older somehow. We stood there for a long moment before he said, "I shouldn't have yelled at you." "You had every right to," I replied. That he shook his head. "Maybe. But I was angry because I didn't understand. And maybe I still don't. But you're my brother, Ethan. That hasn't changed." Something in me broke then, in the best way. We didn't fix everything that day, but forgiveness began quietly, like the first light after a long storm. As he left, Ryan paused by the door. "You know," he said, "Liam asked me to tell you he's doing okay. He said you helped him be honest with himself." After he was gone, I sat by the window again, the city lights glowing faintly below. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. That trip hadn't destroyed me, it had revealed me. sometimes, the people who break the silence in your life aren't meant to stay forever. They're there to show you who you really are, and for that, I'll always be grateful. The message from Liam lingered in Ethan's mind long after the screen went dark. Coming home. 2 words that shifted everything. The air inside Daniel's house felt different now, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel didn't mention the message. He carried on as though nothing had changed, but his calmness felt rehearsed. He cooked, he laughed, he asked about Ethan's writing, yet every word trembled beneath unspoken tension. Ethan tried to match his tone, pretending the days still belonged to them, but silence crept into the corners of every conversation. 3 days later, Liam arrived. Ethan heard the car door slam before he saw them. From the kitchen window, he watched Daniel step outside, his posture stiff, his smile uncertain. Liam was taller, composed, and his presence filled the space like a returning storm. When they hugged, it wasn't passion that passed between them, it was history, obligation, a trace of something that used to be love. Ethan turned away before they came inside. He didn't want to witness what his heart wasn't strong enough to watch. When Liam entered the house, he greeted Ethan politely, a stranger's warmth in his tone. "You must be the tenant," he said, offering a hand. "Daniel mentioned someone new was staying here." Ethan forced a smile. "Yes. Just for a while." The next few days were a blur of politeness. Liam's laughter filled the house differently, louder, steadier, practiced. Ethan could see how Daniel tried to fit himself into that rhythm again, though the melody no longer matched. The easy companionship that had once existed between Ethan and Daniel now felt distant, fragile, almost imaginary. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ethan stepped quietly into the hallway. Voices drifted from Daniel's room, soft at first, then sharper. "You've changed," Liam was saying. "You sound like someone I don't know anymore." Daniel's reply was calm but trembling. "Maybe I am different. Maybe time changes people. Or maybe someone else did," Liam countered. A long silence followed. Ethan stood frozen, heart pounding. He didn't need to hear more. The guilt that had been growing inside him finally took form, heavy, undeniable. The next morning, Daniel found Ethan sitting by the window, a packed bag beside his chair. "You're leaving?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. Ethan nodded. "It's time. I think. I've taken up too much space here." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't about space." "No," Ethan said softly, meeting his eyes. "It's about honesty. And I can't stay here pretending we didn't cross something, emotionally, if not more. Liam deserves clarity. You deserve peace. And I need to start again somewhere that isn't built on confusion." Daniel looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said finally. "I know," Ethan replied. "Neither did I." There was nothing left to say. They stood at the door like strangers again, two people bound by something they could never fully name. When Ethan stepped outside, the morning light felt colder, but cleaner somehow. Days turned into weeks. Ethan found a small studio apartment across the city, bare walls, a single bed, a desk by the window. He spent his evenings writing again, pouring everything he couldn't say into words. The silence that once haunted him now felt different. It was his own. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, just a familiar handwriting. "Ethan, Liam and I decided to take some time apart. I realized that what I mistook for love was comfort, and that comfort without truth can't last. I don't regret meeting you. You reminded me that connection should be honest, not convenient. That I hope you're writing again. You always spoke like words could save you. Maybe they will." Daniel Ethan read the letter twice, then set it down beside his notebook. Outside, the city lights flickered to life as dusk settled over the skyline. He picked up his pen and began to write, not about love or loss, but about the spaces between them. His story wasn't one of betrayal anymore, it was about awakening. About realizing that sometimes, people enter our lives not to stay, but to remind us who we are before we forget. The final line filled the page. Ethan whispered it aloud, his voice steady, almost free. Some endings don't break us, they build the silence we learn to live in. He looked out the window at the world beyond, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the quiet not as absence, but as peace.